Hello, Grumsworth.
Oh, hello, Burlokk. How do you do?
I'm very well, actually. Yeah, I'm very
Mm,
well. Yeah, I'm in good health. How about you?
good health. I can say the same, actually. Yeah,
Very good.
pretty
Very good.
solid. Pretty solid. So we're back here, aren't we, with another of the preamble,
Yes, indeed. Yeah, episode one of the preamble,
episode one. Yeah,
bringing
yeah.
you bringing you an every so often digest, I guess, of
It is.
hobby rambling.
Yeah, there'll be a lot of rambling, to which we bid you all a really warm welcome, don't we, as well?
Absolutely.
What are we going to converse about today? What have you been up to this week, Burlokk?
This week, well, yeah, in fact, this week has been an interesting one for me. I've dove into the world of game creation. Um, Working on game systems for a miniatures war game, playing around with some ideas, working out what ideas from other systems I can lift and are able to make legally distinct enough to not worry about it, I suppose. But there's a lot
That's the
out
way
there.
to do it.
There's a lot of stuff out there, and lots to draw from. But I've got lots of ideas rattling around in this cage of mine up here, and it's coming together quite nicely. Early days, but yeah, we got together some good combat systems for this particular war game, sci-fi war game. We've got some interesting between game ideas, like joining your games together like a campaign, for example. So ideas taken from places like Necromunda, for example, where your gangs will move up in experience and gain skills and that sort of thing. But it's done on a larger scale in a galaxy. I think Mass Effect in that kind of way.
Very good.
Like the video game Mass Effect. So yeah, some interesting ideas are coming out, and a couple of guys I'm working on it with. We've been thrashing out some ideas for a good few days now, and we've got some good things on paper. So I'm happy to see it coming together at last. Because many a time have I had an idea, as we all have, and it's never really come to any kind of fruition. It's just remained an idea.
Yeah, as they do sometimes, isn't it? It takes real strength of spirit, a bit of force, some booze.
Yeah, some booze helps. A little bit of guts, to just go with your instincts on some of these things. Not to second guess yourself, not to doubt yourself. But all in all, I'm quite happy with the progress I've made this week. So that's really the main hobby I've been engaged in, and that is sort of game design to an extent, which I hope to be able to talk about in a little more depth at some stage in the future.
That'd be lovely. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, a little bit of painting, obviously. Still getting my paint to brush in, as is traditional.
As is code.
As is code, exactly right. So, I've been working on a little bit of painting, gathering up some more Chaos Dwarves into the fold, as always. Otherwise, general life stuff, you know how it is. How about you?
General life stuff. I mean, I've done a bit of general life stuff. I try to steer clear of it as much as I possibly can, for obvious reasons, right?
Of course.
But some of that has happened. But more importantly, pertinent to this rambling discussion anyway, it will be the case that I've finally finished off the last three of my Caldor gangs for Necromunda.
Very nice indeed. Right. Yeah, they're coming together really strong from the last picture I saw. They're looking very good.
Yeah, really happy with them. The bases took a little bit of a fiddle. Colour-wise, I'd initially got them in a kind of like a rusty brown type hue, as befitting the ruin of the Underhive, where these little dudes live.
Plenty of rust, plenty of slime, I'm sure.
That's right. Where they live, work and play, scavenging, worshipping the Emperor, like any good, sturdy, devout Hiver should. But yeah, the bases on the first pass came out far too rusty looking and too grubby, which is cool for Necromunda, obviously. But the Caldor themselves, as you can see from the pictures here, are pretty damn rusty anyway. They are brown.
Yeah, plenty of browns on there, aren't there? Looking nice, though.
Yeah, I'm really, really pleased with the way they've come out.
Yeah.
As I said before, I think a lot of the heavy lifting, colour-wise, comes courtesy of GW's contrast paints, which I'll only conscience the use of for robes.
It's controversial, but certainly, yeah, they have their uses. I too have, thrown down some initial base coats. I think for a lot of things with the contrast
Yeah.
paints. Weirdly, contrary to Games Workshop's initial release about them saying it being good for the beginner, I find that to be quite the opposite. Weirdly, I find that
I
they're a
would
little bit
agree.
clumsy to use at times. So having a practiced hand, I find, is actually more beneficial with the contrast range than not.
They are quite clumsy, unwieldy. They're so full of pigment, and you need to apply them quite specifically to get a decent result, especially if whatever you're painting has multiple kind of base coat colours on it.
That's it. Yeah.
I really think that they're not entirely ideal. That's by the by. We can have a good ramble about contrast paints.
Many different paints that I've used over the years, in fact.
And don't get me started on Secret Weapons Weathered Wood, because that will eclipse the rest of this conversation. So I'm just going to...
Yeah, looking at those pictures, you've got some in there, haven't you?
I've got plenty in there. Plenty.
Weathered wood.
Weathered wood. It ends up highlighting the majority of those miniatures, robes, skin, masks, armor, hair, bits of old bone.
Very versatile color, isn't it? Very versatile.
I just find it incredible. But I'm going to try to stop gushing over it, because that will be for another episode, right?
Absolutely right, it will.
I'm here to talk about the bases.
The bases?
Right, which
they were rusty.
They were rusty. They were rusty. They're no longer rusty. They're now in this kind of two-tone colour scheme. As you can see there, it is, some of the plates are Incubi Darkness, which is a lovely blue, black, green. But I love Incubi Darkness. It is superb, really versatile. Yep. It's worked really well on these bases because it's given a good counterpoint colour-wise to the quite light browns of their rags and robes and stuff. It also has like a sci-fi metal feel about it, which is out of place.
Yeah, it does work quite well for that, actually. Yeah, very good choices. Very good choices indeed. And they're looking very strong.
Yeah, I'm really
very strong.
There's a few more to do. The leader and a couple of champions that I've got involved.
Yep.
And then there's going to be some secret followers being added. These ones are some kind of kit-bashed kind of bits and pieces that I'm hoping to fill out the ranks with, because I think that's what you need to do.
And I mean, to be honest, with a lot of skirmish games, as Necromunda is, I do like seeing a good kit bash from time to time. The out of the box is great, but seeing a kit bash, seeing some head swaps, or something as simple as a head swap, or something as simple as a weapon swap is fine. But really going to town on your Necromunda miniatures is cool. It really brings out that personal touch that you want to give to your guys.
It does. I mean, I'm not going to say they're going to be good kit bashers. Far from it. They will likely be they are in truth going to be quite dense, but they're going to be some very, very lightly armored guys, and they need a slightly different paint treatment on them as well. So maybe next week, possibly, we might see one or two of those bods staggering forward.
Good. Well, I look forward to seeing that. That's for sure. Absolutely right. Yeah.
So that has consumed the majority of my hobby time this week.
Very nice indeed. We've got a rough topic to outline today, haven't we?
It's pretty rough.
But nonetheless, interesting. Talking about the genesis of things, the beginnings of things, which is always a good start to a good tale, isn't it? You need a beginning.
I think it also very nice kind of it synergizes well with the number of our podcast and its birth as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Why not start at the beginning?
Yeah, that's right. So, Grumsworth, let me ask you a question.
Go on.
Talking about discoveries and beginnings and births, what was the first sort of contact, that you had with a sci-fi or a fantasy hobby? Because everyone's got one. Everyone's got their own tale to tell. but it always begins with a particular moment, and I can remember mine quite vividly, quite clearly, still to this day.
Still to this very day.
Yes. What was yours?
Well, mine feels like it was only yesterday, but in reality, it must be an awful number of years ago. Like, it's staggering, actually. It actually came.
Gracious.
It actually came one Christmas. The offering of gifts and such is the ideal time for some sort of hobby type item to find its way into your stocking. Maybe parcelled up under your tree even, or maybe, as in my case, it was parcelled up under the tree of my dear cousins. It wasn't even under my own tree. What this was is it was a large kind of impressive-looking box, obviously containing a board game of some description, all wrapped up and whatnot. And it was the case that we spent Christmas Day with them one year, and this box was this present was opened to find inside a piece of cover art on a board game box that is now burnt into my mind and was the beginning, really, of all things hobby for me.
Okay.
And maybe like many of us, there were a couple of different games that were going around at the time.
Yeah.
And there was a fantasy version and there was a sort of sci-fi version. The sci-fi version was the one that was revealed under all that paper all those long years ago, and it was Space Crusade.
Space Crusade. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just an incredible thing, really. So, opening up this box there, I can still remember the scent of all of the amazing cardstock and things.
Isn't that strange? Yeah, their scents are good for that, aren't they? You'd open up something and it'll take you right back. You'll get that smell again in the most unlikely of places, and you'll instantly go back to that one moment in time. Yeah,
so evocative. But yeah, so all this lovely cardstock in this box, these brightly coloured sprues of miniatures. Darker shades for the enemies, but this was the first time that I had ever seen anything like this, and I immediately noticed that on these kind of sprues of all these wonderful looking little guys, there were guns there, and there were swords there, and there were axes there, and there were things with bestial faces, and there was a great sort of grey biped walker in there that had the biggest guns of all and an evil snarling little face.
It did at the very
front. The Chaos Dragon.
That's it. Yeah.
And yeah, just even from just that moment, pulling those sprues out and looking at them, I was completely unaware that they were connected to anything else. That they would require painting if you wanted to. Yeah. They just looked like individual kind of things that I wasn't really aware that it would be such a complex game as it turns out. But so we set to just sort of popping these guys off the sprue, just twisting them off with our bare claws.
Oh, of course. Who needs? What's a clipper? Well, what are some side cutters?
Exactly. What are they? What are these?
I want to play with these toys. These are great.
And that is exactly what they were. So these things were pulled ragged from the sprues. Their bolt guns, assault cannon, missile launcher and plasma gun pressed into their little hands there like this. And then some of the bad guy dooders were all put on their bases and things as well.
Lovely.
We had a little read of the rules, whatever we understood. We found a load of dice, and we sort of started marching them down the corridors. That's the beginning point of it all. In that box were orcs, Chaos Space Marines, all of the things that would lead you into the universe of Warhammer 40,000.
It's interesting, isn't it, how there were so many different races at that early stage when games were being put together within the 40k universe. Yeah. The thinking must have been, let's throw these and some of these and some of these. There was some of the. Is that the same set as the one where you got the early Necrons as well? Those sort of robot warriors, Chaos androids, I believe they were.
You know it. Chaos Androids. You believe exactly right. Yeah, yeah. They were attached to the Dreadnought sprue, so they were in grey, which gave them a very pride of place among the sprue city that lived in that box.
Tough dudes as well.
Very, very. Yeah, I believe they were rolling 3 white dice.
3 white dice.
Yeah. But yeah. So that really began it all. There was a sort of a period of time afterwards where I didn't see anything else that looked like this. But
No.
we badgered our parents into buying us a copy of our own Space Crusade, me and my dear brothers.
Yeah.
And then just randomly, one day, wandering into a sweet shop to buy a small bag of penny sweets or some such, there was a White Dwarf magazine sat on a shelf.
That looks familiar.
That looks like those guys out of this game. They're on there. And then opening it, there was untold pages and pages of painted miniatures.
Yeah.
And ever since then, that has been the meat and bones of my days.
So, the first contact was made with Space Crusade, but your first journey through that hobby doorway was the pages of White Dwarf.
It was. It was. I still own a copy of that White Dwarf, which I bought in later years.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah.
The other one was red ragged, I'm sure.
It was red till its spine broke,
That's all good White Dwarf should be.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I hear it's making a bit of a comeback these days. I hear print journalism isn't dead.
No, apparently not. Yeah. Everything isn't digital, apparently.
Apparently not.
Oh, they tell you what, the generations that White Dwarf's gone through over the years, it's been good and then a bit bad and then really good and then a little bit bad and then terrible.
It's done a bit of everything. Do you remember when they were A5 size? When they were a tiny little, almost like a pocket.
Yeah, and you could roll it up like the handy dice tray and shove it in your pocket.
You could do it exactly like the legendary handy dice tray. Yeah, quite a weapon as well.
Yeah,
How about yourself?
Well, I mean, goodness me, for me, I don't even know where they came from, to be completely honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
But my first memory of seeing anything to do with miniatures or soldiers with that sort of level of detail involved was from a packet of combat cards, actually. It must have been the very first version that were released. I can't remember if it was the ones with the yellow back or the red back, because there may even have been some with blue. But either way, it was a pack of combat cards. And I saw these fantastic looking models, and they looked evil and gruesome, and they had some most interesting names. And of course, as a kid at the time, I must have been about 6 or 7 years old, something like that, way back in the annals of time. But I was a fan of things like Transformers and Thundercats, and I had all the action figures kicking around, right? And so I saw these things, and these looked unusual. They weren't toys. They didn't look like toys, but they looked just as cool as some of my other toys. What are these things? And combat cards, for those of you listeners out there or viewers out there that have played combat cards, it's a very simple game, but it's the imagery that captured me. The logo for the combat cards looked cool. Had a big old dagger ran through it. And the seed of combat was like the edge of a shield or something. So it looked menacing and it looked really spiky and cool. It's like, this is great. And I had this set of cards for a while, and it wasn't really until I wandered into, I think it was a hobby shop somewhere in the south of England. Some random hobby shop, old and dusty, really musty smelling hobby shop,
The best sort.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't get many of them like that anymore, I tell you. But in the corners of some little village, you still get those little bastions of old hobby. Anyway, it was like one of those places. I went in and I saw on the shelves these blister packs hanging up of miniatures, and I recognized them straight away. I said, they're the same figures as from those cards I had. And I still had. I think I carried them cards around with me everywhere I went. I may well have had some in my pocket at the time.
Do you have some now?
No, I don't. I do have some, but they're not on me, not in my very pockets.
Okay.
But yeah, I saw these miniatures inside these little blister packs, hanging on those dusty shelves. And I picked some up and I badgered mother and father. I said, "Oh, let's have these. You're out of pocket money." They said, This is really cool. They look, and I convinced them, and it was some very early orcs and goblins that were in some blister packs, because I remembered those from the cards. I recognised those in my head. And of course, the guy behind the counter did as is right and said, "You need to paint these, right?" I said, "Oh, right.
You are now."
That's it, yeah. And he took me over to the back of the shop where there was this old cabinet, again full of dust, but in this cabinet were all the miniatures that he painted himself.
Oh, I love it so much.
They were great. I said, "Oh, wow, you painted all those." And then of course that was it. That I was instantly hooked.
Yeah.
And he had me hook, line, and sinker. And I think even my folks were like, "This is quite a cool thing. This is
the folks love it, don't they?"
Yeah. And I think he was selling it to them more than he was to me, but I didn't feel like that as an 8-year-old kid. So he sold me, of course, the traditional enamel humbrol. Yeah. With
oh yes,
the enamel humbrol paints, and of course I picked them all up, shoved them in a bag, and I said, "Thank you very much." And I think a few days later, I managed to sit at the kitchen table with the newspaper as was given to me by the folks.
That's very traditional.
Down. Oh, you're going to spill any of that? No. So I painted them up, and that was it. That was me sold. But if it wasn't for that combat card, and talking about White Dwarfs being good again, all of a sudden, they've just re-released. Apparently, they've just redone the combat cards, but in digital form.
Is that actually the case?
Would you believe? Yeah, I saw an advert for it, I think on Instagram, randomly, and it was just combat cards. I thought, no, this can't be right. What's this random person done? But it's an official thing. Yeah, they've released it as a mobile game.
And they're not, or they are the original?
They're not the originals, of course. They're not. No, they're full of Primaris, aren't they? Full of Primaris, full of Necrons. They do look quite good, actually, I must confess.
I'm sure they are.
They look fun, just like your Hearthstones and your Magic Arenas. They're the digital card games these days are a thing, aren't they? So
but they're superb as well, aren't they? If they're nicely run, they're well balanced, and if they look cute as well, then I'm sure it'll be a roaring success. And maybe even imagine this: imagine if some tiny 6-year-old child whips up their mobile phone, has a little look through. Combat cards there, and then one day, how would he find himself into a dusty old hobby shop these days? Though, that happen? Do you reckon?
I don't know. I don't know if that will ever happen again. I don't know if that same magic can ever get captured. That distilled hobby love that comes only from an old man's shop. You can't get it anymore.
Yeah, it's I mean, I reckon there are slim pickings for old men hobby shops these days.
Yeah, but
I reckon they're still out there
somewhere.
And if there isn't, perhaps when we reach the appropriate age, 100,
maybe we could do it ourselves. Imagine that. What would we call it? What would our hobby shop be called?
It'd be called Oldman's.
Oldman's Hobbies, and we'd have every kind of amble available, wouldn't we?
We'd have every amble available that we had created ourselves as well.
Maybe it's some we'd sculpted out with our very hands.
Yeah. Our various mediums, I would imagine.
Yes, exactly right. That was it, really. I mean, that for me is the how I discovered my first contact with a sci-fi and fantasy hobby. It was kind of combined, really, because you had the Traitor Legionnaires in those old school Chaos Traitor Legionnaires, who were part of the Warhammer range but still had the bolt gun.
Yes. I seem to remember. Yeah, so that was kind of perplexing for me. That was, it was confusing. Even as a kid, I remember looking at some of those. Again, we'll talk about White Dwarf again in the kind of catalogue department at the back of the old issues. I would see sort of rows of beastmen wielding clubs, chaos cultists with their knives,
makes sense,
bone, etc., etc.
Yeah.
A guy who looked vaguely like a Chaos Warrior, who happened to have some sort of marvel of machinery hanging off his back,
Yes.
like a couple of thrusters perched so. And then the guy next to him, just a big old assault cannon stuffed in his claws.
Why not?
So, but I'm sure, actually, I'm not sure, but this kind of rings true. Let me see if this nugget of information has settled in the firmament of your chaos knowledge. I believe it was the case many, many, many years ago, and you see echoes of this even now, sort of, that the blood god of chaos, Khorne, had some sort of time travel shenanigans going on. So if you look at even in current times, you'll see a lot of his kind of demonic beasts and such have a mechanical dint about them, don't they?
That's right. Yeah, they do. Yeah. Yeah, I do remember vaguely some of the many, many, many Chaos champions that were around in those early days.
Mm.
And there were so many and varied, so much character captured in those.
Plenty to choose from. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think they all had names as well at some point.
Yeah.
Hacked-Gore, I vaguely remember.
Was he called Hacked-Gore the Space Marine, though?
I don't think he was. No, he just had a sword and a shield, but I think he was one of those named Khorne champions, I think.
Nice. Yeah,
but he was just a random figure, but they'd given him a name in the catalogue, you know. But there was definitely one amongst that range he looked like a miniature version of the big brass monstrosity that you have now, the Lord of Brass, is it?
Yes.
Khorne machines. Yeah. It was like a miniature version of that, like a man-sized version of that. He had this like set of rollers for feet, and it was a fantasy figure, and he had some big old mechanical bionic arm.
Of course he did. Yeah.
As you say, assault cannons strapped to his fists and things. And it's like, how are you going to stand up against this fella? You're a bunch of sword-armed humans.
and I remember that seeming strange, even at that young age.
Yeah, it is bizarre.
I have some of these. I'm sure that in the last copy of this magazine that I read, I saw a load of guys with sort of pointed, beaky-looking helmets with the same gun. This guy is taken into battle against a load of dwarfs with beards and axes. You know,
I want to have that guy. Thanks, I'll have him.
Yeah, he didn't strike me as very fair then. Yeah.
No, you're right. It was. I don't know much about the very, very early lore from those days, or even if there was any. To be fair, I don't even think there was a lot. I think it was just miniatures that
maybe not
fudged together by the sculptors. You know, Jez Goodwin, the Morrisons. I think they were sculpting all the things back then from the old Marauder days, and I think it was just make these guys look crazy and
cool
and really cool.
They did that, didn't they?
Really did, yeah. I love a lot of those old miniatures. I still pore over some of those in my collection, thinking, oh, one day. one day
you'll get round.
Maybe one day I'll even get around to painting them. Who knows? After 25 years.
Well, maybe it'll be the case that once Oldman's opens for business, you'll be able to have a shelf of that beautiful cabinet.
That's it.
With just a load of Khorne guys with bolt guns.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. All you viewers and listeners out there. Once we reach the ripe old age of 100, which isn't far off.
That's right. Yeah.
We'll be opening up Oldman's, and we'll be sure to serve each and every one of you the finest Khorne champion with an assault cannon. We
will do exactly that. Each one will be delicately named by ourselves.
That's right. Gift wrapped as well.
Mr. Bloody Assault Cannons, etc. Yeah.
Sounds groovy.
He'll be an absolute monster. But it's very interesting how sort of memories of just beginning your first steps into the hobby, those Humbrol paints and things like this.
Smells, as you say.
The sense
of the games.
Yeah. The quiet sound of those old model shops and things like this.
Yep. No music was played, of course.
No music was played, of course. No.
the Games Workshops were different. They generally had some loud metal.
Now that was kind of where I was going to move on to, actually, because I think it's the case that people don't discover the hobby maybe in the same way that they did back in the day, maybe, obviously. Because you can walk into a Games Workshop, they're so common these days, and plenty of independent stores are as well, and they're lively, bright places. As you say, there was a period of time, I would say probably the mid-90s to the early 2000s, when every Games Workshop, maybe actually earlier than that, but stretching roughly that time, every Games Workshop in the land would have a good solid collection of long airs selling all of the miniatures.
Yeah, it's lucky if they're wearing a staff shirt.
it was a rare thing to. It was difficult to know they were even going to be serving you, but you didn't mind because like they looked cool and it was a cool shop.
It made sense that these bearded, pierced, tattooed metalers were serving you miniatures that were made of metal and probably had festooned with piercings themselves and were wielding swords and axes. It kind of just fuses, doesn't it? Quite neatly.
It really did as well. It made so much sense. There wasn't even a question in my mind that this was the place that I needed to be in. Yeah, and there'd be some generic metal playing over speakers, and you could walk in there, and the hobby was already becoming accessible, and now it's reached that logical progression whereby, as I say, there's a brightly lit, fresh smelling, well stocked Games Workshop or independent store, sort of almost in every decent sized town, right?
Yeah, it's one of those interesting moments where you think to yourself, gosh, I have seen this system evolve throughout the generations from when I first began to right the way through to how it is now. And there is stark differences, and there are periods within that period of time, which you can pull out and say, I remember when things were like this, or I can remember things were like that. And I saw that change from that to that, and it was fascinating to see. And I think now the hobby, as far as miniature wargaming goes, certainly, and I'm pretty sure it's the same with people that are really into their D&D and have played since the very early days, since the late 70s. They can say that I've witnessed all of this, I've experienced all of this, and it all makes sense. And I've been there through thick and thin, through the rough and the smooth, and all because of that very beginning, as we discussed. When we first laid eyes on that very first miniature, when we first cracked that first plastic miniature off the sprue with our fingers, and now we wouldn't dare.
But beyond that,
talking of functions and serving functions, our podcast has a series of different things we want to try and introduce. One of which will be our next segment, I guess.
I think you're right. I think, and if this isn't the complete encapsulation of service and function, I just don't know what is, really.
No, that's right. Screw up the rulebook.
Exactly.
We're going to analyze a little something here, aren't we? We're going to have a look at a magic card.
That's right. We're going to cast our eye over one, which is something we're going to do. We're planning to do every week, aren't we?
Every time, every time we roll one of these things out.
What have we got today then?
Well, the card we have today, let's bring it up on the screen, perhaps. We have a card that's somewhat recent. I believe it's still, as of the recording of this podcast, still in standard, which is the most recent few sets. And it's got a card called the Elder Spell.
I see it now, yeah.
From War of the Spark. There we are. It's a black card, a sorcery, some rules text, a little bit of flavor text on this one, which is the italics at the bottom.
Which I like a lot on this one.
That's right. Some of the fine text at the bottom there goes on to say this is actually a spotlight card from the story from the story that's woven into the release of this set. So this is a critical moment in the story of the War of the Spark, and the artwork itself is done by Darken, who is a very accomplished artist, in my opinion.
as we can see as well.
Rogues Gaming have done an interview with him, so be sure to check out that article because it's very good. But nonetheless, his work here, it looks pretty magnificent. What do you make of it?
I think so. So Darken there has. I mean, this thing is kind of quite a masterpiece, isn't it? Really, the depth of the picture as well, the sort of elements that are closest to us. There's a massive distance between them and the background sky, and all the things in between. It gives you the kind of feeling that you're looking down into the card, even though your sort of eye level is quite low.
It almost feels, with that in mind, it almost feels as though you have been affected in the same way as that poor chap in the foreground, and your last
or laid low
is or laid low, perhaps. Yeah, for me, it's like my last image I'm going to see is my comrade here being attacked here by these skeleton sorts.
Yeah, it very kind of life draining kind of look about it. It has that that sort of spectral kind of life leeching glow about it, doesn't it? Do you think?
Yeah, these guys are obviously extracting something from these poor chaps.
Yeah.
And it looks like the ones that have been successful are brimming with some kind of power.
Yeah, overflowing with the stuff, in fact, aren't they?
Yeah. I like how the perspective is not only, we talked about how sort of low down it is. You're kind of almost you're sucked in from above almost into the picture, but you're looking up at the characters. But the sort of the angle, the horizon is slightly askew. Can you see? It's I quite like that. It sort of makes it look a little bit awkward.
It does, yeah, it does, and I think that also gives the sort of impression that you were saying, that you perhaps the viewer has been a victim of this elder's spell. That they look like it looks like you're slumping to the side or something like that, which is a really cool use of perspective, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Certainly.
And that's before you even get into the beauty of the color in this composition as well. Starting quite light and dusty, very realistic tones towards the bottom part of the picture, and then going off into this very, very magical, really vibrant looking colors, these kind of quite alien, fairly evil looking characters in all their segmented, slightly spiky armor, skull faced, and then off to the bleak, cold sky above.
Yeah, so it seems like that dusty green kind of atmosphere from the world itself. That's what makes this power that these skeletons are using makes it look that much more otherworldly. It looks like as if this shouldn't be happening in this place, but it is. It's quite a thrilling piece, actually. I mean, you don't know where it's going to go. You know, obviously these people these creatures are winning because there isn't a single human standing, is there? Really, there's
no.
So they're obviously on the ascendance, these folk, but who knows?
And so maybe we can discover a little bit more from the mechanical text on this card as well. What it does in the game for a player after playing it.
Yeah. So as it says here, you cast it as sorcery. So it's a spell you would cast. It doesn't create any creatures it doesn't create any creatures in the game. But it does allow you to destroy any number of target planeswalkers. And planeswalkers was a very big theme for this particular set. I mean, the name itself, the War of the Spark, suggests that it's a battle for and being fought by planeswalkers because they have the planeswalker spark inside them. This is something that would ignite in this character's lifetime at some stage, would allow them to then to have a certain element of power imbued in them from this spark awakening. And it also allows them to planeswalk, i.e. go from plane to plane, travel from place to place righting wrongs, singing songs, doing all the things that heroes do. But villains can
Such
also
as they
have,
do.
villains can also have sparks as well. So obviously this creates this kind of conflict, this multi-planar conflict, which, as far as the story is concerned, of War of the Spark here, sort of culminates in this place. And being that planeswalkers are involved in this right the way through, as opposed to just being the single most hero of a set or only having a smattering of them throughout other sets, there were lots in this particular set. So in a game of Magic for War of the Spark, you would certainly see a lot of planeswalkers on the field. So being able to destroy any number of them
Quite powerful.
would be quite powerful under, outside of War of the Spark, before War of the Spark was released. Having a card that was able to destroy a planeswalker was, okay, and for only 2 mana, very powerful.
Monstrous.
Yeah, absolutely. And destroying any number of them.
Yeah. Bearing that in mind, is that what we're witnessing with this? The magic depicted in the card there, is that the removal of their spark?
It looks like it to me. Yeah, that bright energy that's being drawn out, and looks like it's being fed into their allies there. I mean, the second part of the rules text here says to put 2 loyalty counters on a planeswalker that you control for each one that you destroy.
In this way.
So you sort of drain the life energy out of your enemies and you imbue it into your friends again. So you have to have your own planeswalkers for that to work. But if you don't, your enemy's planeswalkers still get destroyed. So it's a very aggressive card, as is befitting the color. I think the color pie here. It's a double black card, two black mana. You know, that outright aggression. That life drain ability that the black mana has. Very good. And I love the flavor text to go alongside it as well.
Works really, really well, doesn't it? Yeah. The path to power is often paved with atrocities. The destruction of sparks maybe being the prime atrocity.
Absolutely. And being the Planeswalker Spark is such a rare thing that should be cherished and nurtured. To just destroy it out of hand, as is happening here in this image, is an atrocity. So as far as the story goes, you can see why this is quite a pivotal point in the story from how we've described it. Hopefully you can understand. I mean, for any of you guys listening out there on audio only, apologies, you won't see the image, but please go and check it out if you get a chance. The Elder Spell by Darken.
Even if you were to just go and take a look at Darken's website there, or just find the image elsewhere. It is a superb picture, really beautiful, very evocative of what the card does mechanically. Its flavor text is very beautiful. It suits the black color block just perfectly, doesn't it?
Yep, I agree. A fine choice. So,
who was it chosen by?
This was chosen by actually one of our very early listeners, thankfully, by the name of Jody.
Excellent. Very good.
Thank you, Jody.
Oh, bless you, Jody.
Good job. Nice choice. Yeah, excellently done. Right, I think we should probably move on from the magic segment here, shouldn't we?
We probably should. Although that is it does really make me want to paint something using Warlock purple.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Just a nice dark background or something.
Got it. Yeah. Maybe I'll go and throw about a little bit of Warlock purple after we've tidied up this conversation.
I'd be very keen to see that. But tidy up this conversation, sadly, we do have to do. Our time has ground on, and we have come to the end.
It's elapsed, doesn't it?
It certainly has. Very sad. We will return for your every so often digest of hobby rambling.
That's
on the
right.
preamble. Please join us for episode 2.
Yeah, please do join us for episode 2. We'd love to have you along, so that you can listen to more of our curious stories. Hopefully, it's been funny to hear about 2 small children finding crusades and a pack of combat cards.
And hopefully, you can relate to it as well. But if you want to get in touch with us, our information is above and below.
It is. It's all down there, folks. Have a little look-see. Can you think, before we sign off, can you think of an appropriate parting shot for our dear listeners in the form of a quote?
Oh.
Maybe from a series of films.
From a series of films.
A series of films, yeah. I'll give you a couple of these. This is kind of a challenge that I'm seeing for you.
Grumsworth, I never like your challenges. They're always very difficult. I'll do my best. Go on.
Come along now. They're not challenging for a man of your stature. And
very diminutive stature of that.
And lore wisdom as well. So that there are 3 of these films in question. The extended versions, I pushed them to well over 13 hours worth of watching. They are based on an absolutely incredible 3 books, without which probably this podcast wouldn't exist. This hobby would be a very much lighter looking thing.
I think I know where you're going with this one, brother.
Okay then. Good. So is there anything that you can think to quote that might sort of work well as a kind of a fond farewell to our listeners?
Well, as we sign off from this podcast,
yes,
we should show our true nature, the very highest.
The very highest. The very highest. Beautiful. Well, I think that has been a chance for Burlokk, the captain of Gondor, to show his quality.
Show his quality. That's the one I was looking for. I'm ashamed it can't be said for this podcast, which is of very amateur quality, but nonetheless, we've greatly enjoyed bringing it to you. So
it's been lovely.
Until next time, what an absolute pleasure.
Have a good one, folks. Enjoy your hobbies.
Stay well.
You've been listening to The Preamble. Be sure to check us out on Twitch, Spotify, or find us on Player FM. And if you want to get in touch with us, send an email to thepreamble@gmail.com. Your hosts were Grumsworth and Burlokk, brought to you by roguesgaming.com. Special thanks to our contributors, our showcase artist, and of course to all of you. See you next time.